From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today out of the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen reports on a case now being considered by the U.S. Supreme Court, which will have major repercussions, he says, for virtually all agricultural interests, including you producers. The nation's highest court is deciding whether non-point source pollution via groundwater constitutes a violation of the Clean Water Act. Also today, K-State's Greg Ibendahl announces the update of K-State's crop production budgets for you producers to use in planning for your 2020 cropping year. These online budget tools can be extremely helpful, as Greg will tell us. Later, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven with another Stop, Look, and Listen, all right here on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
This is the K-State Radio Network. Good to have you along once more for Agriculture Today. The Supreme Court of the United States is weighing a legal question that will have gigantic implications for agriculture and the vast majority of agricultural producers. Telling us about that, Roger McEowen, Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. Roger, this revolves around the administration of the Clean Water Act and disputes over the years in the court system about point and non-point source pollution discharges. Before we get into the details of what the Supreme Court is examining right now, let's go back to what discharges mean under the Clean Water Act.
Well, Eric, that's a good question, and in terms of what a lot of the terminology means under the Clean Water Act is a really good question, because it seems like just about every single word in the Clean Water Act has been litigated over the past 45 years since the amendments in 1972. But a discharge means that you've got some additional substance that gets added to a waterway, and that waterway is somehow under the jurisdiction of the federal government. And so what the Clean Water Act regulates, it first makes a distinction between point source and non-point source pollutant. And point source pollution is pollution that comes from a discernible point, a ditch or a pipe or some place where we can see where it's coming from, we know where it's coming from. And the federal government regulates that through what's known as the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. And in order to make those types of pollutant discharges, you have to have a permit from the EPA and or Corps of Engineers under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, or you are subject to fines that could be $50,000 per day. And that permit, by the way, is costly. It's about $250,000 and time-consuming to get that permit. Non-point source pollution, on the other hand, is the diffused surface runoff, for example. So most ag pollution is non-point source pollution. You don't have to have a permit for that. The states regulate that, and that's the way the Congress set things up. They said, states, you're responsible for non-point source pollution. There are other statutes also besides the Clean Water Act that can cover non-point source pollution that the federal government administers. But point source pollution is controlled by the NPDES system by the federal government for those types of discharges.
So with that as the backdrop, there has been a litany of court action in recent years, most particularly in 2018 on this question of what is a point source or non-point source discharge, and largely involving the role of groundwater. Let's go over what's been talked of and in the court system and the differing opinions that have emerged from those rulings.
Oh, yeah. 2018 was a big year on this, with cases popping up and opinions coming out from various U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeal. But the basic issue is this, and this is a very important issue for agriculture, and this is a very important issue for agriculture to pay attention to. The key question is whether you have to have a federal NPDES permit if your discharge is directly into groundwater, which then finds its way to a water of the United States, a WOTUS. In other words, are indirect discharges from groundwater into a WOTUS covered by the federal permit system? If so, does that mean, for example, that farmland drainage tile is subject to the Clean Water Act and an NPDES discharge permit? Do you have to have a permit for that? Well, federal government has never formally taken that position, and in fact, the EPA just last year came out and said, no, you don't have to have a permit for that. Groundwater is categorically excluded from the Clean Water Act. But on these cases in 2018, you had the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal involving a Hawaii case that said that, well, it might be if you've got indirect flow into a covered water, and the covered water in this instance happened to be the Pacific Ocean. And they said that, if we do have these injection wells which were the subject of that case, and you have leakage from the injection wells into a covered waterway, then that is subject to the permit requirement. Now, about 2 months later in 2018, the United States Circuit Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit issued their opinion on this. And what they said was, well, that's kind of correct in terms of agreeing with what the Ninth Circuit said, but not always, perhaps. And so they said that a discharge into groundwater does not always mean that a permit is required under the NPDES system. It's only required if there's a direct hydrological connection between groundwater and navigable waters. Now, in that case, the court noted that the pipeline rupture that was at issue occurred within 1,000 feet of navigable waters and 1,000 feet of a WOTUS, and also noted that the defendant in that case had not established any independent or contributing cause of pollution. So the Ninth Circuit said, yes, groundwater is covered. The Fourth Circuit in the next case said, well, it might be, but it depends on such things as proximate causation. Well, then fast forward to the fall of 2018, the Sixth Circuit in a Tennessee case involving kind of a similar set of facts, the same issue, they reached a totally different conclusion. And they said, no, the Clean Water Act only regulates pollutants that are added to navigable waters from any point source. So it has to be a direct discharge into the WOTUS. You can't run it through, for example, it can't pass through groundwater, which is excluded from federal regulatory authority under the Clean Water Act, and then have that water seep into or leach into a WOTUS. So they rejected the holdings of the Ninth Circuit and the Fourth Circuit. That set up the split between the circuits, and then the Supreme Court got asked to take one of these cases, and they chose the Ninth Circuit case to hear.
And so that's how it gets to the Supreme Court level with these conflicting circuit court rulings. The first presentation of this case, the Ninth Circuit, before the U.S. Supreme Court recently took place, and the justices have had a chance to respond to it in a preliminary sense. Is that correct?
They certainly did. The oral arguments in this case were on November 6th, so just about a week ago, and there was some pretty interesting give and take by the justices in terms of the questioning. The EPA took the position that discharges into groundwater are excluded from the NPDES permit requirement, and the county at issue in this Hawaii case pointed out that the Clean Water Act distinguished point source and non-point source pollution. And if you included indirect discharges into a WOTUS by means of groundwater, that would eliminate that distinction and expose, as they pointed out, countless businesses and farmers to fines of $50,000 per day on basically an after-the-fact traceability analysis. In other words, whether that pollutant could be traced from a navigable water all the way back to the point source. Well, some of the justices had trouble with that. Justice Breyer, Justice Kagan, and Chief Justice Roberts looked at the county's rationale there and kind of rejected that, siding with the environmentalists in that case. But Justice Alito came up with an example that he pointed out, and he said, what if I have a homeowner that has a septic tank and the contents of the tank ended up discharging into a WOTUS? And then Justice Breyer, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Roberts looked at that and commented and joined Justice Alito in expressing concern about the potential impact that would have on such a homeowner. And so they seemed to reject the environmental group's traceability test or proximate cause test. And Justice Kavanaugh also expressed concern that if the position of the environmental group were adopted, that the Clean Water Act's regulatory balance between the federal government and the states would be severely, if not entirely, tilted in the federal government's favor. So I think the Supreme Court, a number of justices are really questioning the Ninth Circuit's view on this. So again, I would caution people that are listening, it's hard to tell exactly how the court's going to come out based on oral argument. Sometimes they lead us one direction, they come out with a totally different opinion. But you've got justices on both sides of the political spectrum here that are really questioning at oral argument the environmental group's position on this.
Whatever's decided will be monumental for all agricultural interests. You maintain that?
Oh, I think this is an absolutely monumental case for agriculture and ag businesses to keep their eye on. Just think of the ways that a pollutant can be discharged from an initial point and ultimately reach a WOTUS. For example, the application of manure or commercial fertilizer to a farm field, either via surface application or by means of injection, could result in eventual runoff of excess by the surface or groundwater into a WOTUS. There's no farmer out there, Eric, that can guarantee that 100% of manure or fertilizer application is used by the crop to which it's applied and that there are no traces of the unused application remaining in the soil. And, similarly, organic matter decays, it returns to the soil, it contains nutrients that can be conveyed by means of stormwater into surface water. That's why we have a stormwater discharge exemption for agriculture in the Clean Water Act. But if the Supreme Court were to decide in favor of the environmental group, then that exemption is lost, and that would subject farmers and others to very stiff Clean Water Act penalties unless you get a discharge permit at an estimated cost in over $250,000. That's why I say this case is of monumental importance to agriculture, however the Supreme Court comes out on this.
Well, agriculture will eagerly and anxiously await the Supreme Court's position on this whenever it does come out. In the meantime, Roger has captured all of what he's shared today in much more detail in his blog series, which you can find at washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. Roger, highly important, this item, and we appreciate you covering it with us today. Many thanks to you.
Thanks, Eric.
That's Roger McEowen, Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. This is Agriculture Today. We'll be back after this break. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. We're back now on Agriculture Today. Well, producers, another crop production season is by and large in the books. You can take a look at your enterprises economically, assess them for where they've been and where they might be going via some tools we'll tell you about today on the agmanager.info website out of K-State. They've just now posted the updated crop budgets for Kansas, and to outline how those can be of help to you producers, Greg Ibendahl joins us again, a farm management economist with K-State Research and Extension. This is an annual update, and Greg, these have been found to be highly valuable tools for producers to use.
Yeah, our budgets are kind of one of our basic building block as a forward planning tool, so we're kind of taking our best guess for we think prices and yields and everything are going to be for next year and kind of give our producers an idea of maybe what their kind of expected profits might be for the coming year. And I should keep in mind it's not necessarily a net profit you might get actually from your net farm income. It's more of an accounting profit where we actually put charges to everything. So what you're looking at really when you look at a budget is kind of a net return to management when you account for all cost of production. Before we go any further, pointing out you've put together budgets for both irrigated and non-irrigated production, right? Yep, we pretty much cover all the major crops in the state. And usually for the major crops, we have a separate budget for each of the 6 regions across the state. So it's a pretty comprehensive list. I think there's about 50 or so budgets we have. So, all the crops are covered and all the regions are covered. So from what do you draw to put these budgets together? What ingredients do we find in these, so to say? Well, there's a wide range of sources we use. I guess my biggest source is for the prices comes from my colleague Dan O'Brien. He gives, he takes his best guess for what he thinks prices are going to be. And again, we're asking him to kind of, estimate prices, a year in advance. So it's kind of kind of a hit and miss of whether that's going to be successful or not. But, it's our best guess based on current knowledge for that. And things like yields, we looked at past history for what yields have been in the state. We also talked to our agronomists, get their intake for what they think yields should be. Prices, we use our agronomy department here to get the prices of the inputs because they put out a publication every January about the inputs of all the chemicals that they use, herbicides and insecticides. And then I also have some access to fertilizer prices and such. So all that comes together to play, and it goes into our budget.
So it's comprehensive. You pull together all of the elements that'll make the difference as far as...
Yeah, we do the best research we can and find our most recent estimates and best predictions for what we think is going to happen and kind of put it all together. And, all that shows up to what's going to be the profitability for each of the crops on a per acre basis.
So give us an idea, if you would, Greg, on how a producer can use these budgets. How would they go about putting their numbers in and coming up with some representative idea of what 2020 production might look like?
Yeah, I should point out this. So this is just kind of our prediction of what's going to happen in the future. I kind of get requests from other people. They want to look at our past budgets, and really, a budget from past years to me has very little value to it because that was our guess at the time for what was going to happen. That may not have been the actual result. So if you're really concerned about seeing what happened in the past, we also the KFMA folks publish a history of our crop production enterprise based on KFMA data. So that's your best source looking at what actually happened in the past. So this is a forward planning tool. And again, we kind of use like an average yield for the region kind of based on average soil conditions. So I would encourage any producer who wants to use these is to definitely go through and certainly adjust the yield for their particular farm because that's going to be one of the big drivers for whether something's going to be profitable or not by using their own average yields based on their own expectations of weather and such.
Now, can they adjust other variables like input costs and the like, or are those pretty static?
Well, actually, you can. So we do both a PDF version and an Excel version. The PDF version, obviously, it just has like a blank line if you want to make a change to it. But our Excel version of all of our budgets is pretty comprehensive and pretty changeable. So you can go through and anything you see where it should be different on your farm, like if you want to put a different price in, if you think our price is not accurate, or if you want to put a different yield in for your farm, or you think your input prices are a little different than what we're doing, you have the capability of doing that. And then because it's in Excel, the whole thing will kind of update automatically, and you'll get an idea of what your potential net income is going to be per acre.
Will these budgets likewise account for such things as crop insurance, costs and returns, rental rates for crop ground, and the like?
Yeah, so we put in every cost that could go into something. Again, we're looking at, instead of really net income, we're actually looking at kind of a net return to management. So we have something in there for crop insurance, most of the major expenses. Again, we kind of assume a high level of crop insurance, too, for most the crops that we're looking at. And then for things like we also put a cash rent value in there for a land cost. So if obviously if you own your own land, that's not something you have to put in there, but it is kind of something you need to consider because there should be really a charge for land if you're looking at kind of your return to management from these budgets.
So if a producer walks through all of those variables, puts in their own numbers, or goes with the values that are there, they will come up with some semblance of an idea of what the returns to that cropping enterprise might be.
Yeah, I think our budgets are actually a little bit unique. So the budget will normally, when you look at budgets from other states, they will just really kind of give you a single number that says, this is your net income per acre for this particular crop. Well, obviously, things like weather could make a big difference for the yields. The prices could vary quite a bit from what we first forecast. So we actually have several other pages in our budgets that can kind of help account for some of those differences. So the first thing we have is just kind of a basic sensitivity table where we have kind of like a range of prices that vary up and down from, like 5, 10, 20% above what we think is the expected price. Obviously, it could be different. And the same thing with yields. So it varies 5 or 10 or 15, 20% above and below that. So that would be the first step. You can see, if things aren't quite the same as what you think they're going to be, you can kind of get an estimation of the profitability then too. And then I think we have an item in our budgets that I don't think any other department in the country would have is I actually have a Monte Carlo simulation part of that, which is kind of based on some of the historical norms as far as price distributions and yield distributions. So you can go through and you can start off with your best guess for that, and it will calculate like 1,000 simulations, actually kind of give you a range of what the net income would be, which I think is unique, again, to our state compared to other states.
1,000 simulations, maybe a producer doesn't want to go through that many iterations.
Well,
they surely can get a representative idea.
Well, actually, they don't see all that. It actually shows up in a graph, so you can kind of get a distribution of that way. And as long as you're, I'm kind of a visual learner, so if I see something in a graph, to me, it's a lot more appealing than kind of looking at a bunch of numbers in a table.
Don't want to scare folks off here, but the point is this is highly functional, easy to operate, if you will, as budgets go.
Yes, it is. And actually, for those folks who are doing irrigation, we have actually built, we have a separate irrigation spreadsheet tool that we publish and kind of give you the cost of irrigation based on the price of fuel and how far deep you're pumping and how much water you're pumping. I actually have that particular spreadsheet built into our budget. So for those folks who are looking at our irrigated budgets, that particular part of the spreadsheet irrigation stuff is actually built into our crop budgets.
So, Greg, as an overall thought here, how important is it for producers to go through an exercise like this in the coming weeks and months?
Well, so I look at budgets kind of as a beginning building block to anything else. So if you're kind of looking at an idea of maybe trying to predict net farm income for the coming year, that would certainly be one use for that. But certainly not only that, but it would certainly be a tool for comparing what crop you may want to grow. I mean, if you right now with the current farm economy, if you look at our budgets, you may think, well, there's not a single crop on here that looks really too good. So what am I going to do? Well, it can kind of help you say, well, this crop looks better than the other crop relative to something else. And again, we're accounting for all costs, not just the net farm income. So even though we're not showing it may not be profitable from accounting for all costs, it still could be an okay crop to grow. You still could at least cash flow and hopefully earn some net income when it comes time to do your taxes type income. But so comparing crops, deciding and working with your lender, because that will show you the amount of expenses that you have, how much, certainly on the expense side, looking at just the expenses should be pretty close. So you can talk to your lender about, well, I'm going to need this amount of money to cover my operating expenses for the year. So there's a whole range of things you can do with a crop budget, just other than just looking at net income. That
would really help in that conversation with your lender as to which direction you're going with your enterprises in 2020. So it's just a matter of going to agmanager.info and hooking up with these budgets?
Yeah, there should be a table there that has your region and whether you want irrigate or non-irrigate budgets. And again, there will be both the PDF and Excel version for most of those budgets.
And if anybody has any questions about how these operate, why, there's fully instructional information with those budgets.
Yeah, we built a separate page on the budgets that just has the instructions and some of the background assumptions in there too.
These are excellent tools for mapping out your game plan for crop production in the next growing season, in this case, 2020. Again, the Department of Agricultural Economics at K-State has just posted its updated irrigated and non-irrigated crop budgets looking ahead to this next production season. You can find those at agmanager.info in either PDF or Excel versions, whichever one suits your needs the most. Knowing that a great lot goes into putting these together and keeping them fresh every year, Greg, thanks for doing that and for sharing the word on these with us
You're
today.
welcome. Thanks.
Greg Ibendahl there, farm management economist with K-State Research and Extension. By the way, crop producers, as you're visiting agmanager.info to work with these crop budgets, you might as well take advantage of another interactive tool that you'll find right there as well, the regularly updated crop basis tool, which can be used to examine historical, weekly, nearby basis for corn, sorghum, soybeans, and wheat for various locations in Kansas, as well as Nebraska, Missouri, Oklahoma, and parts of Colorado and Texas. You can examine local historical basis by choosing your location, the commodity in question, and the time period of interest, and the tool will then work up that basis information for you. Again, the crop basis tool, which was updated just late last week, also at agmanager.info. We'll be back with more. This is Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. For you now, today's agricultural news headlines, these courtesy in part of DTN. Well, because of the Veterans Day holiday on Monday, the weekly crop harvest progress report from the USDA was delayed one day, released late yesterday afternoon. And for the week ending this past Sunday here in Kansas, our topsoil moisture supplies at 1% surplus, 59% adequate, and 40% short to very short, while subsoil moisture was at 2% surplus, 67% adequate, and 31% short to very short. As for the state of the winter wheat crop in Kansas, 51% good to excellent, 34% fair, 15% poor to very poor. Planting of winter wheat at 96% and emergence now at 79%. The corn harvest in the state now 90% complete, right on the average. Soybean harvest 83% done, again near the average. And the grain sorghum harvest at 84% complete. That's ahead of the 75% average for the date. Cotton picking is 26% complete in the state as of this past weekend. Nationally, the percentage of corn and soybean harvesting moved ahead by double digits again last week, but remained the furthest behind average in a decade as of Sunday, according to the USDA. Nationwide, the corn harvest picked up speed last week, moving ahead another 14%, reaching 66% as of Sunday. That was still 19% behind the 5-year average, notably behind Michigan at 33%, Wisconsin at 30% harvested, South Dakota only 39%, North Dakota at just 15%. Iowa is 64% harvested, by the way. Meantime, the soybean harvest nationally moving ahead 10% last week, reaching 85% as of Sunday, 7%, that is, behind the 5-year average of 92%. Of the major soy-producing states, Wisconsin and North Dakota at 71 and 74% done are the slowest, and 92% of the winter wheat nationally was planted, equal to the average. Emergence at 78%. The grain sorghum harvest reaching 88% complete. The cotton harvest at 62% in. Even as 57% of farmer borrowers were profitable so far this year, up 6 percentage points from last year, some 82% of agricultural lenders reported declines in farm profitability from all reporting regions. The results of ag lenders surveys conducted by the American Bankers Association and Farmer Mac. Lenders listed credit quality, competition for loans, and weaker loan demand as their chief concerns, according to this report, while producers were listing liquidity, income, and leverage as their top concerns. However, the report noted that trade, tariffs, and weather edged up on the list. Only 9% of the respondents said they were expected increased profitability for producers in the next 12 months. 55% expected profitability to decline. As for specific agricultural sectors, the report said that dairy, grains, and cattle were sectors of the most concern. However, interest in financing for industrial hemp and alternative energy were big of note. Nearly 50% of lenders said that farmers were asking about financing for hemp production, 36% inquiring about alternative energy financing. And nearly 50% of the lenders expect land values to decline in 2020, with lenders reporting an average of almost 38% of land in their markets above market value. Lenders are also expecting compression in cash rents, but few lenders reported above market value rents compared to 2018, as the report read. Nearly half of the lenders said there was an increase in farmer retirements so far this year, and nearly two-thirds said they look for that pace to quicken over the next 12 months. And a group of Senate Democrats released a report yesterday on the Trump administration's agricultural trade aid program. They were charging USDA is picking winners and losers in their attempt to aid producers. Led by Senate Agriculture Committee Ranking Member Debbie Stabenow and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, the report stated the market facilitation program payments were unevenly distributed across the country. The report states USDA's MFP, quoting now, has treated farmers unfairly by, among other things, sending 95% of the top payment rates to southern farmers, which have been harmed less than other regions, and helping farms owned by billionaires as well as foreign-owned companies, as the report states. Now, the MFP was set up last year after the Trump administration vowed that farmers would not be hurt by the trade disputes with China and other countries that had sparked retaliatory tariffs. The USDA did respond, saying this to DTN, that the MFP payments for 19 were set up and being distributed and were based on trade damage and not region or farm size. A USDA spokesperson shared that with DTN. Further, that individual went on to say payments were more weighted to the Midwest and not to the South. Well, a group of food service directors recently had the chance to learn more about ranching and beef sustainability while visiting Kansas and the Manhattan area. Scarlett Higgins tells us here that ranchers and industry experts provided a first-hand look into beef production from pasture to plate.
The Kansas State University Beef Cattle Institute and Housing and Dining Services hosted a Beef Sustainability Summit October 14th through the 16th in Manhattan. The Chekhov-funded tour and educational sessions targeted the sizable market segment of on-site food service, which includes university and healthcare food service directors. Throughout the tour, beef industry experts provided up-to-date information and shared research practices that revealed different sustainability impacts on the environment. Sarah Place, Elanco Animal Health Technical Consultant in Sustainability, communicated the importance of beef's role in a sustainable food system by highlighting the upcycling capabilities of cattle that consume human inedible forage and byproducts to create high-quality protein in safe and wholesome beef. Attendees also have the opportunity to hear from cattle ranchers Galen and Lori Fink and their daughter Megan Fink Larson of Randolph, who believe it is of the utmost importance to visit with consumers and answer any questions they have about everyday life on a cattle ranch. The mission of this event was to provide a hands-on experience that encompasses the entire span of beef production, beginning at the farm level and ending on the consumer's plate. I'm Scarlett Higgins.
Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
When I needed a break, I always looked for such a spot.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Is it not strange that when something bad or sad has happened, that in no time it seems some time ago that it did happen? Time rushes forward. We cannot stop it. Life does go on. I recently had that sensation after a lot of sad things happened to dear friends of mine. It all came to me when I was taking a break. I shook my head like a horse can do, clearing my mind and momentarily settling down on the different happenings one by one. Just like truckers who have their truck stops to enjoy a needed break when driving their long hauls, and the same truck stops used by car drivers to rest momentarily and relax, unwind, just like Main Street in our towns has our favorite coffee shop. It's a place to step in and see the locals, neighbors and friends, to unwind. When I needed a break while working and traveling, I always looked for such a spot. The good ones would have a couple of farm trucks lined up in front of it, sometimes with a dog on the open back, the bed, between the couple of square bales, or with the big round bale hanging over. And sometimes the dog sat in the cab, patiently waiting. Those and other watering holes were or are places to recover, to refill with energy, to cheer up, sometimes without saying much, or doing anything. I've seen a group of farmers sitting down and not talking much, just quietly sitting, sipping their coffee. They did not have to talk. They knew each other, probably all grew up together, going through high school, dating a local gal, may even have vied for the same gal, now a friend. Familiar and known places like that are an oasis in our lives when things have happened or are happening. A similar need I've always seen for towns to have attractive neighborhood parks. They're not the places where one tends to sit down, surely not in winter, but where a good walk with a warm hat and scarf and hands deep in coat pockets can be of great benefit and help sort things out, the many thoughts swirling throughout our mind. As I said earlier, I see the reason for a park as the place to go for that needed walk, alone or with a friend. Just think New York City and the foresight people had to create Central Park. Amsterdam, the Netherlands, has Vondelpark and several more, as New York has more. Of course, our towns are just specks of dust or even smaller compared to those cities. However, the need for and benefit of a park environment remains the same for a person to relieve stress and help sort things out or accept while walking in the shade or with hands deep in warm pockets. Even a good walk in the snow can be invigorating, nourishing the spirit. Such a park in the neighborhood is a great community gift and speaks of good planning. Of course, with our farm families living on the farms, who needs a city park? When a farmer or rancher opens the door early in the morning, he or she is already outdoors. There's the moon, still throwing its light across the yard, competing with the bright yard light. The cows, being dairy cows, may rise. The beef cows may stir in the yards as dogs wake up. The day is starting. The horses may nicker. The out-of-doors is there. The out-of-doors with all its stress of farm life is immediately there, and a deep breath can take it all in, but might be a sigh. At times, farming may be too much, too overwhelming. The only thing I can say to that is there's always the land and the space. But I realize the very quiet can be deafening if things are wrong, and looking into a dog, cow, or horse's face can be so painful. Yet there is the space. On our land, one of the spaces I treasure most is the old, partly overgrown farm road, running from south to north and back. I've always wanted to fully restore it, knowing that people, horses, and wagons long ago passed over it. It was an internal shortcut. Years ago, when her parents were still alive, my neighbor rode her horse, following the old trail. I was glad she did, as it was a tradition. How many thoughts have passed on that trail? Coming back to towns, I pulled the book Parks for People by Whitaker and Brown. The book, as well as others I have on the subject, shows many of the principles to create a park for the people. Open space should integrate with the urban scene. A park is not straight rows of trees planted out in a square. A park uses imagination, and the selection of adapted plant material should be done carefully, as well as placement. Another important part is the ultimate experience of joy, to appreciate the beauty of what nature can offer. We already had a light snowfall changing the landscape here on the hill. Right now, the fruit-bearing shrubs are showing their red berries. Some I like, some I don't. I enjoy looking at the large shrub multiflora, cotoneaster, loaded with deep red berries. It's that joy that keeps me balanced, as well as the tall grasses standing on the open hill, as are planted with the seed pods of the forbs, each holding the other up. On our hill, we have a beautiful vine growing into the trees, and it's called bittersweet.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That's our time for today. Thanks for being along with us. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.